Today on the show, you and I discuss the importance of getting out into the world and meeting people that are different than you. And one man who really did that.
Welcome to the future, where the glass is half full and you'll need new glasses, where you'll be jumping from conclusions.
The past is annulled, and a new future is born.
Never before in history has so much meant so little to so many. AD on the radio.
Yes. 1,000 times yes. 1,000,000 times yes. Yes. What are we talking about? We're not going to get into Cohen today. I know everybody wants to talk about Cohen. We're not going to get into Cohen today. As always, we're going to wait, gather up a little bit more information, and be one of the cooler heads that prevails. Plus, everybody's talking about Cohen. Have you got a gut full of that today? Yeah, me too. We're going to talk about something productive. We're going to talk about a way forward. We're going to talk about something that we talk about on this show all the time. But this is one of the greatest examples of somebody actually putting it into practice that I've come across in a very long time. Do you know who Ken Stern is? Now, this is kind of a broadcast insider thing. If you're not in radio or some form of media, it's very unlikely that you know who Ken Stern is. Ken Stern was at NPR for, I think, the better part of a decade. He was, what was he? He was the executive vice president of NPR, and he was also the CEO of NPR. Now, there are some of us in the media who have viewed the historical election that we just went through as a great way to make money. There's a talk radio station literally right across from the studio where I work right now, a news talk station, that, holy freaking geez, were they dying a death. They were going through a lot of the things that a lot of older leaning talk radio stations were going through. Their demographic was getting older. They didn't care anymore. They were not spending the way they used to. It was big trouble for this particular radio station. They were getting ready to go down the tubes and go down the tubes quickly. However, the election comes along, the world goes crazy, and everybody goes, oh my God, the world's going crazy. Let's see what they're saying about it on the radio. And the ratings shot through the roof. And ever since then, and I don't think they would mind me saying this, they've been on a constant quest to find the crazy. Because, well, that's helped them breathe extra life into a medium that is, well, look, here's a problem with talk radio. He says on talk radio. Problem with talk radio is that it's a medium that, like I said, has an older audience. And aside from me and maybe producer Kenny, who works on 950 AM KPRC, if you listen in Houston, Texas, the same station that carries this show, aside from me and producer Kenny and a couple other noteworthy folks, talk radio has no one on the bench. There's no one warming up in the bullpen. And so there's a problem. And that problem is, oh man, our hosts are getting older. Our audience are getting older. We're going to be in trouble in a couple of years. So there was a little bit of, and this is not unique to the radio station across the hall for me right now. This is an across the board thing. And there was new life breathed back into this kind of media, the media in general, by the election, because the world went crazy and people went, oh my gosh, let's listen to these radio stations. Let's watch these TV stations. Let's watch the news. Let's do all these things that we haven't done in a little while because we have to know what's going on. We're divided. We're yelling at each other. And, well, a lot of places started to lean into the crazy. A lot of places started to capitalize on this. A lot of places were starting to go, we are seeing advertising dollars that we have not seen in years. Our format, which was about to die, along with the vast majority of our listeners, is all of a sudden back up in the game and back up in the game in a big way. So we're just going to ride it. We're going to look for the crazy. We're going to find the craziest stuff we can possibly talk about. We're going to find all the most divisive stuff, all the seediest parts of human nature that we can appeal to. We are going to appeal to, and we are going to get an extra couple of years out of these hosts and this format. And they've been doing that, and more power to them, and there's really nothing wrong with that. This is America. That's capitalism. And if you are caught between a rock and a hard place, we're like, we're about to go down in flames. Oh, look, thousands upon thousands of dollars are falling from the sky every second. You're going to do everything that you can to catch every single one of those careening dollar bills as they rain onto you for a limited but sweet amount of time. So there's some people in the media that took the fiscal advantage of the nutsiness of the last election and everything that has come with it and gone, I'm going to make some cash off of this. I'm going to cash in on the divisive zeitgeist that is the election year 2016 and the years beyond. And you know what? This exists on the left and right. Folks over at CNN are seeing record ratings, making record amounts of cash. Folks over at Fox News, record ratings, record amounts of cash. Division, Trump, all these things, it's been very, very good for the broadcast economy. And there's lots and lots of people that were only too willing to ride that fiscal wave in. Some people that had to ride that fiscal wave in solely those so they could survive. And that's fine. But what's kind of interesting is the fact that this guy, Ken Stern, who worked at NPR, a historically left-leaning situation, didn't feel that way. Didn't feel like, oh man, there's a fiscal grab to be made off of this division. He said that he had a deep fear. And you know what? When you're in it, when you are really in it, this is why you see a lot of political pundits and talk show hosts flame out. They just go, oh my gosh, the deeper you dig, the more depressing it gets, the nastier parts of human nature you come in contact with every single day. It's not fun. That's why a lot of people bail on these things and decide they're going to do something else. But he had what he called a deep fear that America was being torn apart. That the division between red and blue was something he had to do something about. Sort of what we spend a lot of our time doing on this show. We talk about it every single day. He actually went out and did it. I think it's such a great example for all of us. What did Ken Stern, the executive vice president and CEO of NPR, do when he was afraid that America would be torn apart by the red and blue divide? Well, it's an inspiring moment for all of us, and we'll get into it next.
Real radio. 104.1.
Where the left and right come together for fundamental truths. AD on the radio, on Twitter at ADSXE.
So as you and I were discussing, there's this guy, Ken Stern. If you're in media, you probably know exactly who he is. If not, not so much. Ken Stern is a guy who spent like the better part of a decade at NPR. He was their executive vice president. He was also their CEO. But he did something that you and I talk about on this show all the time. And I just couldn't think of a better example of someone more beautifully putting this into practice than Ken Stern and what he did. To be honest with you, I don't know much about him. If you do know a lot about him, if you do know a lot about NPR, there's a very good chance that you are going to be like, hey, he's a terrible person and he did this and he was in charge of that and blah, blah, blah. We're talking about this one specific example of what he did, something that all of us can kind of sort of do that I believe will make the world a better place. Rather than run headlong into the avalanche of dollars that the division in America between red and blue was bringing media empires, he did something very different. He said, I decided to venture out from my overwhelmingly Democratic neighborhood and safely Democratic life and engage Republicans where they live, work, and pray. And he spent a year doing this. He went out, he sought out people that were different from him. We talk about this all the time. Get out of your bubble. Meet people that think differently than you. Engage them. Learn from them. Get along with them. We talk about this all the time. The one thing that destroys prejudice is contact. It's much more difficult to hate someone when you've met them, been around them, and gone, yeah, they're all right. Stereotypes, historical, racial, and societal divides get broken down by people hanging out. And that's what Stern decided to do, hang out with people that are different from him. He's Jewish. He went out and he hung with a bunch of evangelical Christians. And he was like, you know what? I don't really know too much about evangelical Christians. He's Jewish, but non-observantly so. But he hadn't been around evangelicals. And he said he had sort of a preconceived notion of what an evangelical was. He thought it was like John Lithgow's character on Footloose. You know, the no dancing guy. Wow, was it Reverend Shaw Moore? When he had in his mind an idea of what an evangelical was like, he pictured the overbearing, puritanical dude from Footloose. So he found something pretty different. He said, quote, I met young evangelicals interested in social justice and refugee issues, how to help them, not how to keep them out. He said, I met families who'd committed their entire lives to helping the poor and those who live in the shadows. And you know what? It's kind of interesting. That was one of the real eye-opening things that happened with me when I moved to Texas. There's this idea. There is this idea that people on the right, because they, generally speaking, don't believe in social programs. There's this idea that people on the right who don't believe in social programs are selfish, that they're not charitable, that they're kind of in it for themselves and they don't care about the plight of others. They go, that's their problem. They made the choices. They're now living with the choices. Why should I have to take my money and support them and their bad decisions? That's the stereotype of people on the right. When I moved to Texas, which is, especially Houston, so unbelievably predominantly Republican, what I found was people that were so fiercely giving. They were almost aggressively compassionate. When there were floods, when there were hurricanes, when there were people in need, I never met a group of folks that were more hell-bent on doing everything that they could to give in these situations than the people of Texas. I'd never come across anything like it before, and still haven't. There's that unbelievably telling picture that made its way around the internet during Harvey. People were in crisis. People had lost everything. People in Houston, Texas were in a very bad way in the wake of Harvey. And there was this line that was posted. This picture of a line that was posted. People around the block. And I think it was, if you're in Houston, you know exactly who I'm talking about. I think it was Michael Berry, actually, over on KTRH, who posted the picture and said, these folks, they're lining up after Hurricane Harvey. They're not lining up for food. They're not lining up for help. They're not lining up for supplies. They're not lining up for charity. They are lining up to volunteer and help others. That's what I met when I went to Texas. That's what I met. People who did not approve of social programs because it removed choice from the equation, but who would give you everything they had, put their lives on the line for another person. And it was a really illuminating moment for me when I realized that the cliche of people on the right not being charitable, not wanting to help others, was completely untrue. Taking the choice out of the situation, well, that's what they had a problem with. Like I said, it was illuminating. And it was illuminating for Stern. Ken Stern, former CEO of NPR, when he went and he hung out with evangelicals. He said he met families who had committed their entire lives to helping the poor and people who lived in the shadows. He said, I met a pastor who had forged a major social service partnership with his city's openly gay mayor to demonstrate how evangelicals could be known by what they were for, not just what they were against. Now, one of the things he wanted to dig around in was the evangelical support for Donald Trump. I mean, look, a lot has been made of the fact that evangelicals back Donald Trump to the hilt. But let's just disregard his Twitter account for a second. Evangelically, it wouldn't seem like Donald Trump's really batting too high, would it? I mean, he's been married 3 times. He owns casinos. He was recorded with Billy Bush talking about his fame and his wealth and how it gave him power, sexually speaking, over women. Not stuff that evangelicals have been known for rushing headlong to embrace. And it made a lot of the world go, isn't this kind of hypocritical? What the hell? How are evangelicals all about Donald Trump? And Stern came up with something really, really interesting. He said, it's not so difficult to understand. I did meet a few impassioned Trump supporters, but mostly I found people who viewed their support for Trump as a compromise choice between 2 not particularly attractive options. And you know what? We did talk about this a lot in the run-up to the last election. It's kind of a Sophie's choice situation. I knew people on the left that genuinely believed that Hillary Clinton should be indicted, but we're going to vote for her anyway because they thought she was the lesser of 2 evils. And people on the right who were just like, oh, Donald Trump just rubs me the wrong way. I fundamentally disagree with him just as a human being and the way he goes to the world. He's not a good guy, but I'm going to vote for him because I like him better than Clinton. And that's what Stern found. He said he found people who viewed their support for Trump as a compromise choice between 2 not particularly attractive options.
For more stimulation and less irritation, 9 out of 10 doctors choose KPRC AM 950. Houston's more stimulating talk radio.
Don't get the blues, get all the news. We mean all of you guys out there in Radioland.
All aboard!
He's back. AD on the radio.
Give it up, yeah. Give it up, yeah. Bring this on, come on.
So if you are just joining us, we're talking about Ken Stern. Ken Stern did something unbelievably valuable. Ken Stern did something that you and I talk about every single day on this show. But it's something that not enough people put into action. Ken Stern decided that America was too divided, and he was going to go out, meet, spend time with, be among folks that were fundamentally very different from him. a non-observant Jew, decided to hang out with a bunch of evangelical Christians. Oh, and by the way, this guy ran a media empire. He was at NPR for like a decade. He was their EVP, their executive vice president. Then he was the CEO. He was the head honcho in charge. And he said, quote, "I decided to venture out from my overwhelmingly Democratic neighborhood and safely Democratic life and engage Republicans where they live, work, and pray." He went and he hung out with evangelicals. Yeah, he had the stereotypes in his mind shattered. Interestingly enough, when he met evangelicals, a big part of what he was trying to piece together was how evangelicals could be all about Donald Trump. I mean, this is a guy that's been married a bunch. This is a guy that owns casinos. This is a guy who's been caught on tape saying things about women that are just not cool. Whether it was quote-unquote locker room talk or not with Billy Bush, it's not a good look. It's not something that you would think evangelicals would be rushing headlong to embrace. So he wondered, as he met people that were different from him, as he tried to do something to help overcome the red and blue divide in America, he wondered, how can evangelicals be into Donald Trump? And he said, quote, "It's not so difficult to understand. I did meet a few impassioned Trump supporters, but mostly I found people who viewed their support for Trump as a compromise choice between two not particularly attractive options. Some of their final choice had to do with policy, abortion, the Supreme Court, religious liberty, and such, but it was cultural as well." He said, "I frequently heard complaints that cultural elites, especially urban democratic elites, look down upon churchgoers and their religious values." We all know the money line from President Barack Obama about people clinging to their guns or religion. But the longer quote is even more revealing. It's not surprising that they get bitter. They cling to guns or religion or antipathy toward people who aren't like them as a way to explain their frustrations. But what this man did, like I said, is incredibly valuable. I mean, it's really what we're trying to do on this show every single day. This show is about overcoming prejudice. This show is about equality. This show is about how the political construct in America that pits us against each other is just freaking garbage. Because we're all people. We all want the same stuff. We just kind of have different ideas about the best way to get there. And you know what? We can hang out. We can talk. We can learn stuff from people that think differently than us. And we can kind of get to where we want to go faster. Said it before, say it again. I'll keep saying it because it's so important. What do we want? We all want the same things. We want a roof over our head. We want a job that pays for that roof. Hopefully that job, that work, that career is meaningful to us in some way, shape, or form. And if we have kids, we want those kids to have a shot at a life, at an education, all of the above. We have different ideas about the best way to get there, but we want the same thing. So if we bear in mind that the picture in our head of the end goal is the same, it makes us approach one another, people that think differently, in a much more enlightened way. If we think, oh man, we want the same stuff, cool. Oh, you think, oh, okay. Oh, maybe we can talk it out, get there together, learn things. And this is what's so unbelievably valuable about what Stern did. He said, many of us on the left talk about diversity and respecting differences in life. And it's true. Diversity. You hear it all the time. But when people talk about diversity in America, what do they talk about? Well, quite often and quite understandably, when people talk about diversity, what they're talking about is an inclusive situation that gives the same chances and opportunities to everybody. And frequently, diversity is used to discuss people that have maybe not had those chances. People have not been included. People who have not experienced the joy of equality because of something silly, stupid, pointless, wrong, evil, like prejudice against the color of skin, or gender, or sexuality, or where they're from. And it's understandable that when people talk about diversity and inclusivity, they're talking about people that have not experienced that in the past. But equality, diversity, inclusivity, these things are for everyone. And Stern picked up on that. He said, many of us on the left talk about diversity and respecting differences in life. But that is often for the differences in race, sexuality, and lifestyle that we find agreeable, not the differences of the political persuasion, geography, and moral and religious vision that we find somewhat less appealing. It's incredibly self-aware and enlightened for him to say this. Because people do. People get bent out of shape. People say, we want diversity. Well, I'm different than you. Well, you stay down south. We're going to be here on the coasts, being enlightened. While you people go be pig-headed with your guns and your religions in a different state. A state that predominantly votes differently than us. Well, that's not diverse. That's not inclusive. That's not respecting the differences in life, is it? But it's something that you come across a lot. And by the same token, people on the right are not necessarily the most open-minded folks. There's a divide. There's a divide in America. But being self-aware and respecting and cherishing and embracing differences between people is pretty much the only thing that's going to help us get around this. And Stern was self-aware enough to say that often for the differences in race, sexuality, and lifestyle that we find agreeable, we're all into diversity and respecting differences, not the differences in political persuasion, geography, moral, and religious vision. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. You take the rough with the smooth. And that means if you're going to respect diversity and if you're going to encourage diversity, that means you're going to have to experience some things that are different than you. That means you're going to have to engage that which you are not. Just the way Stern did. Now, you may or may not agree with the things that this guy experienced when he went on his pilgrimage to live among Trump supporters and evangelicals and all the things that were different from him. But he did something incredibly valuable. He got out of his bubble. He got out of the echo chamber. He got out of the division that politics, media, and social media causes. He got out of the room full of people that were just applauding everything that he said and did, telling him how right he was, and how wouldn't it be great if the world was all exactly like us. There you go. And the bubble, the echo chamber, the wall that has been put up between us is a very real thing. A recent Harvard poll found that a majority of Democratic millennials say that they did not have a single close relationship with the following: a Trump voter, an evangelical Christian, a gun owner, a police officer, a truck driver, an Iraq or Afghan veteran, or a drug addict. And boy, You can hang out with people that look, talk, walk, think, dress like you, agree with you all the time. But man, you are missing out on some stuff if you don't get out and meet your country. If you don't get out and meet the world. One of the best things for the world you can do is get out into it. And that's been supported by Stern. I just thought it was important that we talk about this today. He led by an example that I hope that we, in some way, shape, or form, whether it be little or large, can all follow.
Now, more AD on the radio.
You and I will get into the events of today in our segment, My Witness News, in just a little bit. Right now, though, gonna draw back the curtain a little bit on what it's like to be a broadcaster. Do you know there's one job that pretty much every single broadcaster wants? I think most broadcasters and comedians and even some actors really, really want this gig because, well, it doesn't involve a whole lot of your time, and you get the right one, it pays unbelievably well. So it's lots of dollars, lots of freedom, and very few worries. It's kind of viewed as being easy work. I don't know. I've never done it. I would love to give it a go. But it looks like easy work. And you know what? I've heard from some people that have done it that it's not that tough. And I'm talking about being a game show host. Yeah. Being a game show host, well, talk to Drew Carey about it. Drew Carey, I think part of the reason why he took The Price is Right was because it's a 3-day work week. They shoot everything that they've got to shoot in a week within 3 days. He doesn't have to really put any thought into it once he learned the game, which he was familiar with because, you know, everybody knows how The Price is Right works. It's not like he has to do a lot of prep for it. And the money for it is freaking phenomenal. And I think he owns a professional soccer team, Drew Carey. And he was like, I wanted to own a soccer team. And, well, I can just do that with my Price is Right money. That's how well it pays. So a lot of us in the broadcast or comedy or I guess even acting world are interested in the gig of being a game show host. I don't know if I would like it, though. Only because, as Brian Regan points out, sometimes you just never really get to dig into the interesting stuff.
Talking about game shows, I like watching them. And my favorite part is the beginning when the contestants come out and, you know, tell you a little bit about themselves. It's like their only real moment. And sometimes they have something interesting to say, and the host never asks a follow-up question. It just kills me. Number one, tell us about yourself. My name is Eugene. I'm a scientist. I'm very close to isolating a gene. If I'm successful, I'll be able to cure every disease known to man. All right, ready to spin the wheel? You don't want to hit a zonko or you're going to hear this. How about you, number two? My name's Toby and I got a dog. Oh, really? What kind of dog you have? That's what's on my TV set. I'm not sure where they get some of these contestants. True or false, Pavlov's theory proves inferior beings will respond to a bell. True. Ding, 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 ding. Yeah!
So yeah, being a game show host doesn't really involve a whole lot of prep, not a lot of research. Don't have to dig especially deep to do it. And you know who I would imagine would probably enjoy a gig as a game show host now? Two folks that did not prep in any way, shape, or form for a broadcast that they had on Monday night. During a game between the Clippers and the Mavericks on Monday, the announcers talked about how the Mavericks got Dirk Nowitzki back in 1998 by trading Robert Tractor Traylor, and then joked about what he was up to nowadays. Turns out he died back in 2011. so they had to apologize later after the broadcast.
He just launched his career like nobody could guard him anymore.
I guess Milwaukee didn't see it either. They drafted him and then traded him to Dallas draft day for Robert Proctor Traylor. Who's he playing for now?
The Detroit YMCA over 40 league.
We made light earlier that he was traded from Milwaukee to Dallas in exchange for Robert Proctor Traylor. I was wondering what Robert Proctor Traylor was doing today. Totally slipping my mind, I guess Don's mind, but he passed away a couple years ago, so may he rest in peace, and our apologies.
Yeah, apologies.
Absolutely.
I didn't realize
Yeah.
that.
Unbelievably awkward. Do you see that Patton Oswalt talked about turning 50? Went on the record when he was on the Seth Meyers show saying it's not as fun as it used to be.
I don't mind turning 50. What I mind is turning 50 in 2019.
Okay.
That stinks because, like, the time to turn 50 was in the 50s. Because people were okay with you going, oh, you're 50? You've had a kid? Well, you just sit down and start to die. Just relax, do a crossword puzzle, slowly become racist, and then die. But in 2019, you turn 50 and people are like, you're 50? Well, get on your mountain bike, you silver fox. Let's get going.
So if you are like me and Patton Oswalt, you're a pretty big Star Wars fan. Here's the thing. No matter how much you and I love Star Wars, we are nothing at all. I tell you, nothing compared to a man who recently pulled what might have been the most extreme Star Wars fan achievement I have ever heard of off. Yeah. What did he do? Get this. A Star Wars fan recently built a model of the final scene from The Last Jedi from 100,000 Legos. Yeah. Put together a model of the final scene from The Last Jedi with 100,000 Legos. Wow. Impressive stuff. It just goes to show what you can accomplish when you don't really have to waste any time dating girls. Ooh. This is an interesting one. Did you hear about the scandalous football theft that happened this week? Yeah. Football theft. A piece of football espionage. Someone stole something from an NFL player that could cost their team games next season. A lot of games. What was it? Who was it stolen from? You see this? If you're one of our listeners in Florida, there's a very good chance you heard about it. Somebody stole the Tampa Bay Buccaneers playbook from running back Peyton Barber. Yeah, somebody stole a playbook from Tampa Bay Buccaneers running back Peyton Barber. And you know what that means, right? That means right now, some other NFL team holds in their hands all the secrets to a stellar 5-11 season. So as you and I were talking about earlier, and as we've talked about a lot, one of the best things you can do for the world is to get out into it and meet people that you wouldn't necessarily spend time with. Forge relationships with folks that think differently than you, that are different than you. Like I said, it's one of the greatest things you can do, and we talked about it earlier. And, well, sometimes that happens by force, and it turns out to be a good thing. You know that Amtrak snafu that happened, where people were stuck on that train for 36 hours because of a snowstorm recently? Well, did you see that an Amtrak passenger talked to the news after being stuck on that train and said that people who wouldn't normally talk to each other became friends and they should do it again next year?
Well, the food on the train was enough. It was fine. They were running a little low in the morning. They were free and open with it, and the crew spent a lot of time trying to make sure people were happy and the needs were made. And people rose to the occasion to entertain each other. The walls of communication started coming down between people. People who wouldn't normally talk to each other suddenly became friends. I think we ought to go up there next year and get together
If you
again.
are like me, you find that to be highly encouraging stuff. Do you see that President Trump flew to Vietnam? President Trump flew to Vietnam, and out of habit, I think he complained about painful bone spurs in his heels. President Trump also went on the record saying his daughter Ivanka has created millions of jobs. Sadly, most of them in China. Senator Kamala Harris. This is an interesting one. Senator Kamala Harris, who we talked about on the show the other day, has gone on the record saying that she supports the decriminalization of sex work. Yep, she's taken a run at being president of these United States of America and supports the decriminalization of sex work. Just in case you wondered why Robert Kraft just endorsed Kamala Harris for president. All right, that is it for me. Thank you so much for hanging. Thank you for being a part of my radio family. As always, this time that you and I spent together, it's the best part of my day every single day. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll do it all over again. Have an awesome one.